Hello everyone, welcome back to next session of SAP Security. In this session we will be discussing about authorization concept implementation. Let's assume that your company want to implement an authorization concept before go live of an SAP implementation. So these are all the steps which is required to finalize or to realize an authorization concept in the context of the entire implementation process. During this process you wanted to even estimate the resources you required based on the output you have derived from this concept. Let's see how do we do this. Okay, implementation method and authorization. First of all, setting up an authorization concept must be planned and implemented step by step using a project plan. In the example used here, the project was divided into 5 key points like project preparation, business blueprint, implementation, final preparation, and go live support. During the project preparation we will include all the decision makers, including internal project team members as well as some external members from maybe from customer side. Next one will be the business blueprint. During the business blueprint that we will be analyzing each and every step of SAP business process, and we will document this business process, and this will be the basis of our authorization concept. During the implementation phase that we will be realizing or implementing all the roles that we have finalized in our previous session, that means the project preparation as well as the business blueprint session. The next one will be the very important one, the final preparation. During this time that we will be testing all the roles, and we need to train the users what is the roles and what it is used for. Then we will also do migration of business data into our SAP system. The next will be an go live and support. During this time we will be realizing our entire project into our SAP system, and which will show the benefit of our implementation project. These are all our roles and authorization concept steps. It is important that the user can only perform the task that they are authorized to perform. That's what our main goal of this authorization concept. So we have to achieve that all the users are assigned with the specific role or specific task which they are authorized to perform. For example, the transaction codes or the reports, or maybe internet links, or maybe the tree structure or the menu structure. And it is important that we define all this thing during this phase, so that during the development of the role concept that it is very clear that what transaction or what report is assigned to which users. It is quite important that we design this authorization concept in such a way that it can be used for whole entire SAP lifecycle. It is recommended the authorization concept should be a separate project as such. What we have seen in the many SAP implementation, it is tend to give less importance during the implementation phase for authorizations. This leads a very complicated restructuring after the implementation project. That means it is tend to say, okay, fine, we will work on a SAP all and development system and stuff like this, and the end we will not be able to design a perfect authorization concept, and we will be working around with a lot of workaround solutions. In the end you will have a not a well defined or well structured authorization concept in productive system. So once the system is live and everything is running, it is quite difficult to change the authorization setting. It can interrupt the business. So it is very important that we need to run this authorization concept design parallel to any of SAP implementation project. So basically we are trying to demonstrate what are all the steps which we can accommodate during the implementation of authorization concept. Okay, step 1, preparation. In these steps, first of all we need to set up a team for user roles as well as authorization. So it means role development as well as user administration. In general, these two teams will be different, and we need to educate this team, and we need to clarify lot of prerequisites of authorization and assignments. So please also keep in mind that during the implementation process that you may need to do this thing for different SAP system. There may not be one system, that you may have different systems. So we need to take all this under scope so that you can synchronize your authorization concept as much as possible with the different SAP system. Then train the team for user roles and authorization. Then you trigger the role and authorization concept project. So who are all can be the team members for authorization? During the authorization concept design, the biggest challenge will be that bringing the business requirement and the cross-functional requirement together. That will be a real challenge, because for example here if you see in the diagram, this is the project team and this is the basis team, for example. Okay, and the business user are outside this circle. Okay, they are the key business users, they know what is the business needs. So it is very important, or it's very challenging to bring all these people together, and it is important to bring all these people together. Especially it is very important to bring the end users or the business users to this project. So that is generally done by let's say by an IT team from the customer side, so that you understand what is the customer requirement. In the best case scenario, for example, in a best case scenario, each module will have somebody called authorization manager or authorization owner, who defines what is required in the specific module, and they will coordinate between the modules for the cross module authorizations. Or in some cases we can also use change management consultant, because the change management consultant will have entire overview of the SAP project, as well as he is linked to all the users. He is linked to the business, or he or she is linked to the business, as well as all the project managers and the stakeholders of the entire project. So we can also use the change management consultant as a resource in our project. In a best case scenario, that we identify one person from each module as an authorization owner, or from the customer side or from the project team, it may be quite easy for you to set up this team. So the next step is analyze and conception. In this phase we will analyze the business process in company along with the project team, and we will realize the job role through role concept, and determine the user roles, and we will complete the roles based on what we have analyzed, and determine the framework for implementation of roles. And finally check the authorization concept, detect some shortcomings in the concept before actually implementing. Okay, next one is technical concept of role implementation. Let's assume this is the user. The user, what directly assigned to the user will be a composite role, or we can call this as a job role. Job role means a position based authorization concept or a function based authorization concept. let's give some more idea about how do we design the concept. You can have two different kind of authorization concept. One is called position based authorization concept, another one is called function based authorization concept. In the position based authorization concept, what generally done, we take one job function, a position, then we define authorization concept for that, one business scenario from SAP, and we will create a job role for that. So that there is a lot of advantages and disadvantages in this one. In the position based authorization concept, we can use it for one position. For example, here accountant is an, he will get an account payable. Account payable is a job function, it's a job, right? It's a one specific job. So we create a role for account payable. In the function based authorization concept, we will create something called FI, account payable, what are all the transaction based on the function. Okay, in a best scenario, in my experience, that we combine these two together. Okay, you create all this single roles for each breakdown functions, and combine the single role functions and create one position, which you can call it as a job role. So a composite as a job role, which contains lot of additional this job role or the composite role contains lot of single role. Each single role is breakdown to specific function in SAP. For example, GL account maintenance, it's a single job function, it's a function in SAP. So put whatever the transaction code related to GL document maintenance in this particular single role and create one function based role, small function based role. Yeah, then we can combine this together, give it to one job role. Then we can, let's say for example, balance analysis and GL account maintenance together, we can create a composite role as a manager account payable and assign to one user. Otherwise we can take this one, create one function based role, create one job role and assign to the user, and this job role can contain many other function based role also. So this inside this single role, then you will have lot of transaction code as well as reports and some another web links or something, whatever you'd like to have it. So this is the technical overview of how do we create an authorization concept. We will come to that detail, how do we do this in a typical scenario. This is an overview. So what we will have, a user will get an composite, you can assign a composite role to the user. Also you can assign the single role to the user. Let's say you wanted to have only this particular job function, then you can assign only this function. You don't need to assign the entire composite role to the user. But that will not be a very good process. Even though we say technically it is possible, but in a perfect scenario, always have a composite role or a job role to be assigned to a user. In our typical SAP environment, each user have a job function to complete. So each job should have its own function. So if you are going for a position based authorization concept or a job based authorization concept, you create a job role which is for each SAP, each function inside the business. Let's say sales representative is a function. So what role the sales representative will do, then you can narrow it down. Let's say he will create a sales order. So create sales order is a small single role, and he will create purchase requisition. Purchase requisition again a simple role. This all together will come for an sales representative, and the sales representative role can be assigned to the sales representative in one go. The next phase is we will determine the user roles. So for this we will be using Microsoft Excel. That's the best way to use it. in this scenario, then this will be like your kind of a business blueprint. So now how do we determine, or how do we derive to this each roles? So what are we trying to do here? That we are trying to determine each transaction code, and we are trying to map it to one operation. Let's say external accounting and general ledger is an sub process. Then we have closing operation, profit and loss adjustments. Then we have this many transaction code here. Then same like this, account payable, invoice and credit memo, then packed document for vendor. Then we have this many transaction code for this. Then we need to identify all this transaction on the business process which is being used by this customer. Next, once we identify business process, then we will identify the job role. Let's assume this is one single role. We created one single role for profit and loss adjustment. Okay, and invoice and credit memos. So we created one single role for this, and so each is a single role. Let's assume like this. Then you have job roles here: FI manager, account payable manager, or AP accountant. Like this, you can define all the job functions. Then we can determine this role is required for this job function or not. Then we can mark like this. Yeah, then we will have an entirely, so how many of single role which is required for one job function. The next phase is role implementation phase. In this role implementation phase, let's say we will create different single roles, same like what we have seen in our previous slides. Like we will create, for each function we will create a single role. So for example, here maintain document is a single role, and closing operation is a single role, balance analysis is a single role, and correspondence is a single role. So from this single role, then we will create a job role, financial accounting manager. What are all the functions required by this particular job role? Then we can assign only that single role here. Then AP accounting manager, account payable accounting manager. Here you can assign this specific single role. So the advantage in this specific approach, that you do not need to repeat the same transaction code different times. So you have a function based, here you have a function based approach. For each function in SAP you define as one single role. Here you have a position based approach. That means each job role or a composite role will have these single roles. So that you, for example, in this particular example, maintain documents, this is coming 3 different composite roles. So if you do not use a composite role concept, then you need to assign this specific transaction code and authorization object 3 times. So we will be, in a typical scenario, we will have hundreds of roles created like this. So in this case, you avoided creating this multiple times. So you create a single role for each SAP function what we have defined it before, and then you come to a job function, then you assign that specific roles into this job functions. During the implementation phase, you also may have some deviation of the some changes which you may require in this concept. Let's say, for example, here we have correspond print request. So you do not, AP manager, you don't want this one, only AP accountant need this one. Yeah, so if you have some changes like this, these kind of changes, we can create a separate single role. For example, we will create a single role only for this one, we will create single role only for this one. So slight changes from our actual concept, but this will not be many cases, it will be very small cases like this. This we can identify and create a separate role. So this is a very easy approach and it's a very stable approach. So the next step is implementation. So during this step that we will be implementing the role concept, then you will create single role and the impacting role. Impacting role means reference role, or let's call it as a template role. This template role will have the transaction code and the authorization objects, but the awk values, for example company code, stuff like this, we will define it as a variable. Then in the scenario that we have different company codes that we want to use the same role for different companies, in that case we will be using this template role. From the template role you can create a derived role. That means this derived role will contain a specific countries, then you can derive so many roles coming from this impacting or the template role. That is called the derived roles. And you can create a composite role as we seen before. We can create this composite role, and we will also create some customizing role. This customizing role is actually based on different concepts, but this is not widely used. I never seen at all, in fact. You can create a role assigned to a specific project in the project IMG. So when you do that one, whenever you do any changes, it will automatically assign the transaction code to that specific role. But it is not very practical. That's the reason people doesn't use this customizing role. Then we will also do a functional check of role contents. So during this time we will create the single role. Single role means single role which contains all the transaction code and the objects. That means it contains all the technical data. It will have the transaction code, the authorization objects, as well as the links and menu, whatever. All the technical information is assigned to a single role. Then we will create a composite role. Composite role is nothing but it's a collection of single roles. And we will also create reference role and derived role if you have multiple organization level required for your scenario. We will see that how do we create this one in detail. Let's say you want to create the role, one template role, but you want to use the same authorization concept for different company codes. Then you can create a template role and you can derive a derived role which will have an company code and other organization values and can be used for a different company codes and organizational sets levels, organizational level sets. Our next step is quality assurance and testing. In this phase we will be testing the roles and authorization concept, and we will realize these jobs through role concept. So we will create a kind of test users and assign this role to the test user. We will do an internal test. In a better scenario, you do an internal test, then you give it to a functional consultant or end user to test the roles. Then we will check the quality of combination of roles. Let's say if you assign two different roles, how does it works? And it is very important that you need to do a negative check. Negative check means normally what you do is you do a positive check. Let's say you assign some roles to this user, then we go back and try to run the transaction code or create a document. It's a positive check. Negative check in the sense, in our scenario in the previous session we have seen somebody creating a purchase requisition, somebody is going to release this purchase requisition. So in this one, if you are created a role only for purchase requisition creation which should not be released, then you try to release the purchase requisition, then that's going to be a negative check. In that case that should not pass. It should not be able to release the purchase requisition. Then if it is able to release the purchase requisition, then it is something is wrong there. The reason why we need to do the negative check, if you go to one transaction code in SAP, from that transaction code you can switch to different transaction code using the menu path or different functionalities. So it is very quite important that you do a negative check for all the roles what you have created. And we will also train the end user with the new role concept. Maybe you are implementing a new SAP system, they may not be aware of how does the role concepts works, and we need to train the users. And then you will release the roles and authorization concept for end user testing or functional test. Once the test is completed, then we will release to production. The final step is the cutover plan. Now we need to prepare the production for actual usage. That time you need to create a lot of user master record in the production user. So you also need to do some additional activity. Let's say kind of create a user group, so you can group these users. Let's say somebody from different, based on company codes or based on modules. How do you want to create it? It's up to the customer. So we need to discuss with the customer what kind of user groups you need and what kind of information is mandatory for each users. So we collect all these users and we create these users before in hand and assign these roles. This needs to be done before the actual go live date, so that you can also limit the users by starting date of actual go live date, so that nobody will log in using the system, nobody will log into the system and use the system. You can also prevent such things. And for example, something like printers, what printers needs to be assigned to users, what parameter needs to be assigned to the users. These are all very important informations that you need to collect it from the user. And once you collected this information and you created the information, you need to distribute the user ID and password to the users. So you need to find a medium. How do you distribute this one? So these are all in your cutover plan. So whatever, let's list down what all we will be doing. We will be creating user groups, and you may also need to create some company address, and you need to define some mandatory fields for user master, because in the user master also you can define some cost center and accounting number. And the reason for the cost center is that if you want to distribute the cost of the user to different cost centers, or you want to identify by a cost center, then we can identify it in the user master. And the user group, so the user group, cost center, or printer to be assigned, parameters to be assigned, these are all we will determine. And the actual and the users need to be created, and we need to map all the roles which we have created to the actual users, and we will start creating the users. Once you created the user, you will distribute the user ID and password to the actual users. So in parallel, we can also develop an user authorization administration concept. So it is better to have a decentralized user authorization administration policy. Let's say you have a group of people who will develop only the roles and group of people who will do a user administration, and you need to train these user administrators what role to be assigned, what is the procedures which need to follow while assigning any role to users. So we can also determine, or we can also define a concept for authorization itself, because it's very important that we need to control this thing in a very secured manner, because any wrong assignment can have a problem. So decentralized user administration is a better way to do, and we can also implement central user administration. Central user administration means instead of you technically logging into different SAP system, that you can log into one SAP system. From there you can administrate it different systems. We will see how the central user administration work, or how do we set up in our course later. So this also we can define on parallel when we are creating the roles for our end user or the functional team. Okay, this will be the typical scenario. For example, we call this as 4i principle or 2-head principle, whatever you wanted to call it. Let's say we have a function called system administration. The system administration we can divide it into three, that is authorization data administrator, and profile administrator, and user administrator. This we can combine if it is necessary. Otherwise, authorization data administrator you can also create, divide into two. Let's say somebody who can create role, somebody who can maintain role. You can create two different role and assign to two different people. Again, it depends on the sensitivity of the business. And then we will have additional role for activity or generating profiles, and you have user administrator. In the user administrator also we can divide it into two: user maintenance and role assignment. In many cases this is also very quite important. User administration, if this is with one person, then there can be some, they can create their own users and assign the roles to the people. Then it is divided into two based on the 4i principle, so the person who create a user will not be able to assign roles. So it's like a segregation of duty within the user administration. Segregation of duties means SOD, in order to prevent any risk in your ERP system, we can implement this kind of segregation of duties, so that this is not done by one person in the SAP system. This is a typical scenario in authorization administration. If you wanted to have a secured environment, it is recommended to have this kind of segregation of duty within the system administration of SAP security. Okay, here I would like to show you a typical example of a role development. What it's something like, what we will do is we will first define the naming convention. How do we want to define the role? Let's say it start always with Z, starts with Z or Y, is created by customer. SAP also delivers lot of standard SAP roles, that is SAP underscore then the role. That means this is created by SAP. Better we do not change anything in there. So if you want to create a new role, then you will start with Z or Y. In some cases you can reserve namespace with SAP, then you will have your own namespace. Then you can start with that name. So that name, then we will define some standard of how do we derive a name. So for example, in this one we say customer namespace is Z, then role type, if you say somewhere C means it's a composite role, T means single template role, yeah, that is that T means template role, and D means derive role, A means a single role but it is not a template role which has all organization. A separator is a underscore is a separator in our case, and system, what system, module, also we will use the module here. Organization unit, how are we going to use organization unit, so what kind of department, and so like this we will define what kind of naming convention we want to have. This is quite important, this naming conventions, yeah, because that using this naming convention you should be able to identify this role is used for what. It is very very important that naming convention should be perfect, otherwise you are going to duplicate lot of authorization to a different names. So in this scenario you have seen, okay, is that T means it's a template role used for this particular offset P91, that is for financial. Then is the module, then XXX means it has all authorization, then it's a composite role, so create PO. So the name should explain what is this particular role is used for. Then we come to the role matrix. The role matrix, you can see, for example, this what we have defined, one creating purchase order, then these are all the two transaction, then this is used in the composite role 1, this is a composite role, sorry, purchase clerk for Netherlands. Okay, this is a composite role. Let's say when I say here I have total, I have 4 single roles for this composite role. These are all the, sorry, 4 transaction code for this composite role, and here this composite role have 7, like this. So we can, from here we can see, okay, for example, this account payable administrator for Netherlands, which has how many transaction codes. So these are all the transaction code. This is the single role which will be used for this. So like this you can come to a conclusion of how many roles needs to be created in this format. Thank you very much. We are coming to the end of this session. I will see you in the next session. Bye bye.